Welcome everyone to this session on the occupier perspective. My name is Lisette van Doorn and I'm the CEO for Europe for Urban Land Institute. For those of you that don't know Urban Land Institute, we are a global nonprofit organization, a member organization, focused on knowledge sharing on real estate and urban development. I'm very pleased to be joined today by Catherine Harrison-Thomas. She's the Managing Director, Global Business Partner for CIB and DWS at Deutsche Bank, and also Ellen Bainbridge, Director of Workplace for BBC. In our organization, obviously, the future of work and the future of workplace and the future of the office are topics we deal with almost every day. For us, this has been one of the big, say, almost surprising things that have come up through this crisis. The real estate industry the last couple of years has been very, very busy with the future of retail. And now sort of surprisingly, the future of office has come up. And obviously there's a lot of discussion. At ULI, we are currently running a global survey among our members, discussing what the future of the office and the future of work will be. And our constituency, although from all over the real estate industry, very much focused and constituted of landlords, developers, and investors. So I am actually very excited to hear more about the occupier perspective today. And without taking more time, I would really like to hand over to Catherine and Ellen. And maybe both of you can introduce yourselves a bit more detail than I've just done. And maybe to start with, you can share your experience from having, say, worked from home the last 6-7 months, not only from your own perspective, but also the companies you represent. What have been the advantages? What have been amazingly well? What have been the challenges? Maybe also talking about the generational perspectives. As we hear, there are quite some differences from that as well. Maybe Catherine, you want to start?
Sure. Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction. So I look after corporate real estate for Deutsche Bank, pretty much the globe with the exception of Germany, Spain, Italy and Belgium. My colleague looks after those. I would say I guess our working from home experience is really varied depending on where we are in the globe. We're a global organization. And I think depending on the type of work that you do. So clearly, if you've got a heavy dependency on technology or you're a trader, it's been pretty difficult for our IT developers. It's been pretty challenging. But I think for the majority of the staff, and it really is the majority of the staff, it's actually been surprisingly good. I think it's quite exhausting doing quite so many Zoom and Skype and Teams meetings. I seem to spend my entire time on screen. And I think one of the challenges that I've been talking about with my team is actually making sure you take a break and going and getting a cup of tea or coffee. You seem to do that more naturally in the office than potentially you do at home when you're just sort of sat in your little cubby hole, wherever you've been able to find that to do your work quietly. I would say a couple of things on it. I think we've been quite public in discussing openly that we've been talking to all of our staff globally. We performed a really large survey of the entire company to ask them what their experiences were, what the challenges were, what were things that the company could do more for people to help them through the challenging times that COVID's presented everybody. And it was very interesting that overwhelmingly people said, actually, we don't want it to go back to what it was before. We don't want it like it is now, but we don't want to go back to what it was before. And we want somewhere in between where we could be maybe just a little bit more flexible and just help manage that home and work balance with a bit more intelligence and empathy. So that's something we're working on at the moment. It's certainly consuming a lot of my brain power at the moment with lots of my colleagues across the bank from the regulatory side of things. Of course, we're heavily regulated. We have a lot of roles that are supervised, so it's more difficult for them to be at home, and we've had to have a lot of regulator considerations over the past sort of 6 to 9 months to allow a lot of our staff to work from home. But clearly that's not likely to continue once COVID hopefully is sort of resolved one way or the other. Through to kind of, as I said, lots of teams that are very agile, like our payments teams and things like that, where actually not having that ability to collaborate and scrum around a problem and having to do that online or through, as I said, the Teams functions or whatever else, it's just a lot more challenging. And I think people have missed the spark that they get being in the room. So I'll hand over to Alan now, but I would say, just in summary, I think it's been amazing. I'm so proud of our IT guys. They've just been incredible. I'm so proud of all of our facilities staff who've really cared for people that have had to be in through the duration and made them feel very safe and secured and cared for by the company. But I think we're all looking forward to a really good cup of coffee, the odd gin and tonic after work with the team, and that spark that you get being in the office, even if it doesn't go back to being 5 days of the week. I think we're all hoping for 3 or 4.
Thanks, Catherine. That's great that you can share that from such a global perspective. Alan, what's been your point of view?
Yeah, my name's Alan Bainbridge. I'm the Director of Workplace for BBC, so I look after BBC's properties across the UK. So we've got about 200 odd properties, which vary obviously from small local radio stations up to New Broadcasting House, which is at the top of Regent Street. Our experience has been very, very mixed, because we've had to maintain quite a lot of our staff coming into buildings to keep the news on the air, to try and keep programs running where we can. We're also, it's an event which we're reporting on as well. So again, we've got that side of the operation swinging into action, as well as keeping the business as usual running with remote working. Our experience has been good, similar to Catherine's, that I think everyone has responded really, really well, and it has been easier than had you been talking about this a year ago and say, Catherine's probably the same. She probably sat through many meetings planning for Brexit and planning for no deal Brexit, and then this came along, which was, just put that into the shade completely. And it's been fantastic. I think whilst we're in groups like this talking about this, we should always be really, really mindful that there are many people whose lives have been totally disrupted and possibly forever in many aspects. So we are lucky in that we're talking about how we've dealt with it, and how we're going to come back. I think the facilities management industry as well, particularly, I think this is their moment to shine and reflect on what they did to keep businesses. I mean, as an industry, they're seen as nothing but a draw on your bottom line. And as they've suffered as an industry because they've allowed themselves to be taken down and down and down on the cost model. I think in the FM world, they should grab this moment to say, look, we're the people who looked after you and made it safe. Because a lot of it is about making the workplace, be at home in your room, and everyone's room is different, or having to come into the office. It's making it safe, and safe means different things for you to perform your work. And as a corporate employer, that's your role. And it has been really, really interesting to see how we have done it, but all the organisations have responded to their responsibility in carrying that out. But you're right. That was, I think the other thing to mention is, well, when we started this as a temporary exercise. And I think in everyone's head, although it was likely to be for 3 or 4 months, in our head, it was sort of a 6 weeks, 2 months sort of thing that was in our head. And as it went on, it was like, oh, crikey, no, we're still doing this. So there was a migration. I will have to find somewhere to sit properly, and I can't just lean against the worktop to do this type of activity. And I think now we're into the second phase. It's like, this really is, it's going to be over a year by the time we get to the end of this, probably, which is, an organizational control. That is quite a big thing, a really big thing. But yeah, we similarly have done surveys. We've done 2, we're about to do another one. Very, very high score of people liking many of the aspects of this life that we have now. Some aspects definitely not, but there is a strand of people who desperately want to get back for different reasons, desperately need to get back. And again, it's heightened that variety of people, work style, workforce, and solutions that we have to give. One size does not fit all, never did. Some people thought you could get away with that, and I think that has been exposed completely.
And maybe to build a bit on what you just ended with is some people like some aspects really well, and some aspects, and also the diversity probably within your workforce on who likes what facilities do they maybe have to work remotely versus working in the office, and how do you think you're going to cater in the future for that huge diversity in demands? It also seems to have been empowering the employee almost to finally have a choice. Catherine, you also mentioned that people want choice, not necessarily work from home only. How, as an employer, do you start to, and I totally get it's still early days on that future thinking, how do you think you're going to cater for that wide diversity in demand going forward?
I think everything that Alan said is really, really true. I think that the interesting point here is that the start point isn't the same for everybody, right? Because your personal circumstances, whether it be multi-generational living, whether it be that you're in a flat share, whether it be that you're living on your own, whether it be that you're living in a country with an unstable, electricity or Wi-Fi, typically, that start point's been really different for everybody. And I think what we in the early days focused on was getting everybody to at least the same kind of baseline experience. As it's gone on, the stressors around mental well-being, around team connectivity, around brand association, productivity, all of those things, we've had to keep a really close eye on. And not least of which, because as an employer, you have a duty of care for your staff, and that didn't just stop the moment they weren't in your offices, right? And if anything, it got more complicated, and therefore required almost more thought and more effort to make sure that people were still being cared for. I mean, I'm so thankful. About 2 years ago, the bank started a program called Mental Health First Aiders, and to be honest with you, it's been a godsend, because some people have found this incredibly stressful. Even as we're talking today, and we all are inviting people into our homes. It's virtual, but for some people they find that incredibly stressful and intrusive, and you and I might be quite fine just chatting away in a screen and not worried about somebody seeing my house or whatever, but for other people that's definitely not the case. And you could come on with lots of use cases. I think as we look forward, we've structured a program across the bank, and we've brought some really brilliant people together, whether they be look at legal and regulatory, whether it's HR, whether it's productivity, IT, corporate real estate. And we're working together as a team to really understand on a country by country basis and a business by business basis, what does that look like? What does successful look like as a modern employer? And I think there's a couple of meta themes that kind of cut across this. One is, for the first time, all of us will have 5, even 6 generations in the workplace in the next sort of 2 years. And to be able to create, and I think, Ellen, you used this in a couple of times when you were talking, to be able to create that inclusive workplace for that generational and also different work function responsibilities is really challenging. And COVID's made that sort of thought process have to mature a lot more quickly than I think it was organically already kind of moving along. I think the second thing is, the focus now on technology and enabling tools is also just been turbocharged through COVID. And so, you know, thinking exactly what you were saying earlier, Alan, you know, thinking about how can we keep connection with the staff? How can we make sure that they can see when, I don't know, the last time the office was cleaned, or, you know, the last time that, you know, if they're sharing a desk or whatever, who was at that desk, you know, linking that to contact tracing, all of those kinds of things, you know, we've had to really think about as an employer and work out where do we want to be on that evolutionary scale, and a lot of that depends on employee buy-in, because a lot of this stuff has to be voluntary by the very nature of things like the GDPR regulations, where, you know, you've got to get people to opt in to share their own personal data and location and all of those kinds of things to help it work. So I definitely think we haven't reached a point where we've made any decisions as an organization. We've definitely reached a point where we have recognized that what we were doing before and what's got us to this point isn't probably going to get us to the next point, and that as an organization we will I think change the way we use our space, what the space is for, and how often we use that space. Do I think that's revolution? I think for some of our countries, given the duration of our investment profile to some of them, and I'm sure you've got the same in your portfolio, you know, some of them we haven't touched for a number of years just because they're perfectly fine and we didn't need to, but now probably we'll have to. And so again, it's getting everybody to that. I mean, I don't know about you, Alan, but it's getting everybody to that start point, I think.
Yeah, it's very, as I said before, there's stuff was going on already, and this has speeded it up. So the conversations around making the workplace an inclusive place for a completely widening sector, age, and need was there, and some people were starting to pick that up. Other people were not so quick. This means you have to do that. Where my mind is, and we're running exactly the same exercises to where do we need to be, what do we need to be doing. There's a couple of things. One is normally, and you'll be doing big projects, and it's you get in that conversation about the corporation, the real estate, doing it to people, and we want to do this thing, and you try to get people to buy into the change, etc. This time, the change has happened, and it happened within about a week, and it happened to the CEO as well as the most junior, and more importantly, the newest start in the company as well. So it happened right the way to the top and the bottom. So without having to convince the board about what the staff want, because they've had the same, some of the same experience, maybe slightly better than somebody in a one-bed flat, but anyway. So that's a completely different thing. And now as well, now this has gone on for so long, the conversation now can start with, so you have these new habits, behaviors, and lifestyles that you've adopted over the last 6 months, and many of them you want to keep. We can now possibly support you in those things that you want. So it's something that the employee wants that you are now able to give, rather than taking away from the employee something that you want to implement and change. So that's a different conversation. And then I think the office, so there's many things written about, is it the death of the office? I don't think it is the death of the office. No. It's the death of the core office. I think the death of those offices that you think you can get away with, and we all have properties that we can do more with, but those properties can't perform the thing that's going to be needed. After COVID, we'll still be human beings, and human beings need to come together. We enjoy coming together. We solve problems together. We create things together. And the office, the building that people will come to, might not be called an office, the building people will come to do those things will be needed more than ever. The stuff that we sat at a desk and didn't talk to anybody, then we can do that somewhere else. Might be home, might be a coffee shop, somewhere else. But that's the big change, that this building, one of the most important things it does keep the corporate culture together. That's you need to keep everyone together, otherwise you're a bunch of separate people. You're not the entity. You've got to keep that. And again, I think if your organization has a strong culture, then it's able to do that. I think if your culture was a bit weak and a bit lack depth, again, that will have been exposed as well, I think, through COVID, and the staff may have questioned things. So I think it's so fascinating, has so much opportunity. It's a window though that's not very big, and if we're not careful, people like Catherine and myself, if we're not on it with everyone else, then everyone will start to come back, or maybe get forced to come back, and then they're not very happy about coming back. And this golden opportunity to just reset something which needed to be done anyway, it needs to be seized upon. And I think the staff will be looking to people like ourselves to, what are you going to do about it, you know, to help us.
Yep.
Can we stick to that point on good versus bad office and poor office versus what kind of, with the knowledge you have now, maybe also different from pre-COVID, if any, or is it just accelerating thoughts you already had? What is a good, your future best office, and what is a poor office? How would you define that?
So if I go first, because we had to reset our offices because we were occupying and continuing, and I know a lot of people shut the office down and sent everyone home. We have to keep everyone going. So we interestingly switched on the same process as if I was planning a new office, and that we got the drawings out, we did the 2-meter spacing, we worked out how to set the office out. We started rolling all that out in a design. We got the architect in, they started to run the floor plans before the government guidance came out, so that when the government guidance came out, we were virtually there on it. Having set that out, we're then able to set it all out and set it up to do several things, and we approach it in the same way. You know, we need to comply with government guidelines. We need to be able to support the staff and give them the reassurance that it's safe to come in. And we've explained exactly how we're doing that with cleaning and wipes and all the rest of it. But also to give them permission to self-police it, because we don't want to be having people walking around telling everyone off. They need to be able to have permission to go, excuse me, it says 2 on the wall and there's 4 of you just walked in the room. You know, it's a self thing. But that goes back to this, as I say, the same principles. As a well-designed office, we've talked to the professionals, the architects, the engineers about the air conditioning, so we're able to talk knowledgeably and not try and paper over it. And then it's able to flex when the regulations change and we know what we're playing with. What did sort of wind me up quite a bit at the beginning, then lots of people were buying Perspex screens and buying this, that, and the other. There's been so much money spent on putting those things in, where there's a bit of care, attention, and detail to the design, which is what you should do for a good office as well. So it's exactly the same principles. And some of our more modern offices were able to flex really easily, and the occupancy that we were able to support in the office was better than some which are not set out so well, and the occupancy that we can get was really, really low. I've heard people say that the newest offices, they could get really good occupancy. The oldest offices, they could get really good occupancy because they're all cellular and everyone's got their own office, so they're all tucked away. That middle ground with a halfway house, which proved the most difficulty.
I would echo actually a lot of what Alan said. I think we took our time to figure it out. We like, you know, in a very different way. We had to keep some of our key guys in and working, because obviously they're managing money markets and things, and so the last thing anybody needed on top of COVID was a financial crisis. So I think we were all very, you know, really motivated to make sure that we kept the money markets really stable, and I think the industry really came together on that, and that was just phenomenal. You know, the most important thing, you know, some of our areas, we pay people's pensions, we make sure that payrolls are running, we make sure that businesses could get access to the funds that they need to keep their businesses running. And so if we weren't in and keeping everything running, then we would have quite a big effect, I think, on society in a very negative way. And so I think it was really critical to ensure that people could come in safely. And I think once people got into the office, it was very safe. You know, we followed all the right government guidelines. We had all the right markings on the floors. We limited, obviously, vertical transportation through the lifts. That was probably the biggest challenge, if I'm really honest, getting people actually in and on the floors, given, you know, you could really hardly have anybody in the lifts, and making sure that you balanced things like stairwells out with fire regs. You know, very easy for you to say, yeah, we'll just have everybody coming up the stairs, you know, on one side of the building and coming down on the other. But of course, in the event of a fire, that just can't happen. So I think there were a lot of very practical challenges that everybody fixed around and delivered. And it was actually a joy to watch the team working in such a, you know, fantastic way, in a fluid way, with the business, with local authorities, with our staff. What does it mean going forward? I would actually also agree with that, and I think it is the offices that were in the middle, the sort of the 1970s designed offices, wherever you are in the globe. 1970s didn't seem to be a good architectural year or decade for offices to work with COVID. So I think we have had some challenging locations, and then the more modern offices have been very, very easy to adapt, because they were already very flexible and heading that way anyway. We too have resisted the urge to go and buy perspex screens and try and start sticking them on desks and things like that. Instead, we went to something that we felt was much more secure, which was to go to a split operations, to ensure that we had two teams working from home and in the office, which made sure that we managed our resiliency requirements to the market and the regulator, but also our staff. And it just really helped, you know, lower chances of cross contamination between teams and things like that if somebody was very, you know, unfortunate to get it. And then as a result of that, we were able to space them out very evenly on the floor to maintain that 2-meter distance without any real fuss. And I agree with you, Alan, the devil was in the detail. And if you just took a moment to have a breath and really think that through, there were some very easy, pragmatic solutions. As I think about it going forward, and we've got two very substantial projects. We're moving our entire US investment bank and wealth management businesses into and corporate bank into our new One Columbus Circle location, which is amazing. And in London, we're still spread across, I think we're still in 9 buildings in London. And we're centralizing everybody into 21 Moorfields, but that's not till 2023, because we're still building that one. That was a build to suit out of the ground, so we've got a ways to go on that. But in both locations, actually, there's some really common things. We took some really big bets nearly 3 years ago now, that we could see the workplace really changing and more flexible working being not just a nice to have, but being a requirement as an employer to be able to offer. And we were very committed in our conversations with people like returning mothers. One of the challenges is if you're a returning mother and you know, or father, whoever's the primary carer, and you're trying to have a job and come into work 5 days a week, that's really hard. And you never have your relationship with your daycare or whatever else. And so when you're committed to being an equal opportunities employer, we already identified that we needed to be a little bit more flexible to help people, you know, in that endeavor. And we could already see a generational change with expectations of a more output-based management expectation, which is to say that you've trusted me as your employee to do a piece of work, and how I choose to do that piece of work and where I choose to do that piece of work, as long as I don't cause tax or legal or licensing challenges, why can't I do that from another location? And we could see that narrative developing with each new generation that was coming into the workplace. And so we took these big bets that we, one, didn't need such an enormous footprint, that two, people wanted to have different work settings to help them in the different tasks that they do in the day. So a more agile working environment where you might do some knowledge work and want somewhere really quiet and you know, where people can't keep interrupting you, or you might want to go and scrum around a problem with a team. I can imagine the creatives in the BBC doing things like that as well. And through to the IT guys who, and the payments processing, you know, guys who have to work in these great big teams, but they probably have those different tasks through the day. And what we want to do is to make sure that people could access the right setting to be as productive as they needed to whilst they're performing those tasks. So we'd made these big bets, and thank God we did, because now I've got these two big behemoths coming on, and you know, I feel very fortunate that the design that we've put into both of them fits perfectly in this new narrative. It wasn't designed with that in mind, and we certainly didn't have a crystal ball, but we're certainly very glad that we made some of those very big changes and we worked with the business to adopt them, because as we move into both of those locations, I'm really confident that actually we haven't got to make huge changes to the design, and I might emphasize a bit more the collaborative zones, and we may put more self-configurable kind of project spaces in. But other than that, I don't think we will make many changes. One thing I am very grateful for is that it has accelerated the wider want for an app to help us manage occupancy and for people to be able to interact with the building in a different way than they were before. And we've working with CBRE on that, and we've adopted their host platform to help us with that. And thank God we were already starting to do that, because of course they've been able to adapt it to help us with some of the COVID type I guess outreach programs around, I want to come into the office today and I want to book into that desk, you know, when was it last cleaned, when was the meeting room last used, being able to link that to the contact tracing, all of those kinds of things. It's been a godsend, because we've been able to adopt that, and we're starting our first pilots in a number of locations actually in the next 3 weeks. So I can't wait. So it's a shame we hadn't already got it on board, so I could have talked a bit more authoritatively on the experience of that, but I'm excited about what it will deliver. So I think what I'm finding interesting, Anna, is we're completely different industries with completely different kind of workforces, and yet so many of the cultural generational sort of workplace, what is the future of the office questions, we're both asking those, and interestingly I think we're hearing quite similar things, which gives me a lot of comfort, actually.
Yeah. For me, it encourages me that it's about people, and that's why, you know, you're talking to your people, we listen to our people, we design around people, and that's why, rather than I think in the 70s where, you know, you mentioned, I think we're designing for maybe corporate something or other. I don't know what it was, but I don't think it was around people.
I definitely agree.
Okay, we have a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to give you both the opportunity to maybe share some closing remarks. A couple of topics we haven't really talked about. Well, Catherine, you just started to touch on technology and app, but technology has become, I think, a much bigger topic also for a bank and a financial institution. Cybersecurity,
yes,
IT, tenant user interaction. And the other topic that real estate players are very interested in is the cost perspective. Because how much is that counting? Is it, well, we talked a lot about that not actually that much seems to change going forward, even if remote work has become so much bigger. How important are all these elements for you?
So maybe I'll tackle the last one first, because it sets up quite nicely for the rest. So I actually think the offering that you provide your staff going forward has never, ever been more important. In the war for talent, and there is a war for talent, as a company, you've got to be very clear what your values are. You've got to live by those values and role model them. And I think choice is just not an option anymore. You need to provide people with that choice, and you need to provide people with the toolkit and the structure to be successful in using that choice wisely. This is why we're starting to try and structure our response with our staff. It's why, and I'm sure Alan it feels the same, it's so important to go on that journey with them in an open forum, in open collaboration. We've fed back very openly what the survey told us, and we've talked to people very openly and the market about what we think we need to do next. And I think when you think about that in the context of the office, that transparency, that clear brand identity and what you stand for is actually very important. And the use of the office will be, in my humble opinion, dominated by people-centered issues. They will want to connect with the brand and the company. They'll want to connect with their manager. They'll want to connect with their team. And then they can do exactly what Alan said earlier. I wanted to applaud, you know, the jobs that you could just admin-y type things, sit at a desk. Why on earth would you waste your time commuting often 2 hours each way every day just to do that? You could just do that nice and comfortably at home, you know, spend the day with your dog, you know, etc. And then when you come into the office, it feels like an event. You know, it feels like this amazing place for you to go, and the high energy, and that's, when you think about it, that's what a company wants too, because all of us, you know, want creative outcomes. And I might be in a bank and Alan's in the BBC, but ultimately what drives us is that creativity, that spark that happens between people to create a new idea, a new product, a new television program, whatever it might be. And so I think this is why I personally believe that the office has almost become more important. It just probably is that for a lot of us, we need less of it, and it needs to be appointed differently. So I think that's kind of where my head's at with balancing off that sort of need for being an employer of choice and the role that the office will play in that. The use of technology, I believe, is a real enabler, and I've never seen so much demand, I think, from occupiers with landlords to have much better communication, much better interaction on the buildings that we're occupying and the services we're using. I think that was starting, you know, really for the last 18 months, I've seen a big shift in that. And of course, we've seen big companies like CREtech and others spring up with these amazing tenant, you know, landlord tenant platforms. You know, the sudden realization from landlords that they can offer online yoga courses or get-togethers between the tenants, you know, and that sense of community to differentiate themselves from another sort of static asset that, you know, the landlord doesn't really do an awful lot with. There's suddenly been quite a big competition in that, and I've seen some of the big landlords, Land Securities, British Land, Harrison, all of these guys suddenly embracing that, and as a result, certainly as an occupier, we can suddenly have a conversation that I possibly couldn't have easily had 2 years ago. And I think that's super exciting. So I think long may it rain. I genuinely can't wait to get back to some sense of normality and into the office a lot more often. I do really miss it. I am very lucky. I've been able to spend time with my 2 kids, and I think I've had more dinner with them during COVID than I probably have had, and I probably sound like the worst mother in the world, for 10 years. So I've taken full advantage of all of that. Sort of, don't shoot me. Just trying to balance work and life. So I can see the benefits, but I think, as I say, I think I will rest on the office is really important. It is the heart of it, or it presents the physical kind of ability to connect as a community, and our job is to make that as friction-free as possible, I think, and as enjoyable and productive an experience. So that's probably where I'll end it from me. How about you, Alan?
I think the technology is really interesting. I think it's I think you bring a good point there, in that some of it was happening, some of these static buildings, the technology great. It's there for the BMS. It will run the systems, but as a interaction between the occupier and the building and the landlord, I think that was so overdue. Some overhaul. We had a comment before that we're going through the revolution that retail has been through.
Yes.
I think in the same way that the technology that retail uses, if you think about organizations like Deliveroo, you know, they've gone through the roof because the whole retail, the hospitality experience has shifted from in to out. They would consider themselves a technology company, not a food delivery company. The data that they use to manage their business is you know, sharp, probably sharp as yours.
Hopefully.
whereas in the property and the FM world, I think we've been lacking in using that technology to really improve the experience. And I would say that the job now is not to be frictionless. The idea is when you go in that office, you've got the organization has got to delight you when you go through those doors. It's got to be a moment of delight. You've got to be proud to work for the company. You've got to enjoy that day at the office, go away recharged, and then you can work remotely. The remote working gives another talent opportunity as well, that we're not fixed with a fixed pool from which to draw that talent. This flexibility. I mean, I live in Derbyshire. I'm 2 hours out of London, and estate agents in my area are reporting massive uptake in people from London who are buying properties, because if you're only in the office 2 days a week, then you can live somewhere else. So technology will play a really big part in that, being able to allow that. But you can now draw from a much wider pool of people. If they don't have to be there every day, it's a fantastic opportunity. And I'm like, I think this is a great, well, somebody right at the beginning of it, when they knew what I was getting into, said, "Oh my goodness, this is all your Christmases and birthdays come at once, isn't it?" And you know, for every hour I've had to talk about gels and wipes and social distancing and all those sort of things, these conversations that we're getting into now, I think are really, really interesting. And I think there's some great stuff to come out of it. I
found the conversation really inspiring, really interesting. Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Catherine, for your contribution.
That was really enjoyable.
And it was really enjoyable. Thank you.